Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Jen.
How are you today?
I am great. I'm doing really, really well today. How about
Oh,
you?
that's so awesome to hear. Me too.
Oh,
Doing
good.
great, doing
Good.
great.
Hey, I'm happy to hear that. Listen, we're back for another Just the Tips. Excited to be here. Excited to be talking about this topic. I think it's relevant and important. Um, Today we're going to talk about working from home and the situation that I think a lot of businesses are finding themselves in right now with, they adapted really well to the pandemic when they needed to and, set their employees up to work from home. And I think in a lot of cases, we found that businesses sort of were okay with that more than others. Some really made a push to get everybody back in the office as soon as they could. Um, and others didn't. They're okay with employees working from home, either on sort of a hybrid basis or just full time from now on going forward. That's just virtual employment is kind of the wave of the future. So today, in our Just the Tips episode, we're going to talk about some of the exposures associated with that and what business owners can do to sort of control a little bit of that risk, right?
Oh, for sure. So, what we saw during the pandemic, and you're absolutely right, people really adapted really, really well, and then found it wasn't going to be the chaos I think that they expected it to, or some folks expected it to, and worked out really well. And in today's world, you have to give advantages where you can for employees, and some of that includes that work-life balance and working from home. But with it comes some real exposures for the employer because even though that employee may be working from home, they are still working for the employer. And if they are injured, it's still a workers' comp issue, right? So how do you manage those things when you're not able to manage the office? I remember early on in the pandemic, there was an article about young workers uh, and those with families during the pandemic leaving major metropolitan areas for, maybe a hometown or where they had family to help with childcare and so on. And there was one in particular that stuck out to me because this family moved from Chicago and moved to, like, North Dakota or something, right? And she didn't want to tell her employer. And of course, the big insurance geek that I am, my first thought was, what about the comp?
Well, that happened a lot, and it wasn't. I think the reason that they didn't want to tell their employer is the important piece of it, right? Because they were
Mm-hmm.
probably getting a little additional stipend for living in a high cost area, and so I think that was a more common than most people think. People were leaving those major metropolitan and those high cost of living areas for something significantly lower and still collecting that paycheck, that that Chicago, that New York City paycheck that they were collecting and living, you know somewhere else, and in
Absolutely.
some cases other states.
Sure. And those other states may have drastically different workers' compensation rules, regulations, payouts, payments, and if they're living in a state and they're injured, they have the rights to choose where they want to receive the benefits from in a lot of cases. But more than that, there are very little there's very little in the way of controls that an employer has for someone who is working out of their home. So while I'm in my office, I have my desk, my things, right, ergonomically set up so that I am minimizing exposure to myself for repetitive motion injuries, carpal tunnel, et cetera, sitting with hunched shoulders and back and so on. But you don't know what my home looks like. You do, but the average employer who wouldn't know what my home looks like. You don't know if I have a jungle gym in my workspace or what other toys or playthings I might have around.
Sure.
What kids underfoot and animals underfoot,
Right.
right? And other.
And office staff, a lot of times when your office manager or whomever, kind of goes through everybody's workstations and they, like you said, can set things up so that they're, as ergonomical as they can be for that person. Um, and they take training. There's classes that staff sometimes sits through as an office to kind of minimize some of those risks. Like, hey, if you're sitting in front of the computer for a long period of time, take a 10-minute break, or take a 30-second break every 10 minutes or whatever it is, to reduce eye strain and stand up to stretch your back out. All that sort of stuff. There's far less control from somebody working from home, and I can attest to the fact as somebody who did work from home also, your setup sometimes is the couch, sometimes it's the kitchen table, sometimes it's,
It's
wherever it
stationary.
needs to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And what people don't even think about are the simple things, right? Like this has wheels, right? I've got wheels on this chair. I can motion and move and move myself around to where I need to be. At home, I was in a stationary chair.
Hmm.
And so when I'm moving and bending, I'm moving and bending my body rather than moving my chair around to accommodate where I have to be. So while I'm normally a very clumsy human being, and the idea of having wheels on a chair at home is terrifying, even here is a little terrifying because it's just, amazing. I haven't cracked my head open yet.
We're all a little surprised.
Yeah, we're all a lot surprised. Um, I don't have that luxury at home, and you discount it. You don't think about it, right? Like you don't think about having to move or turn and the things you have to do with the wheels and how even the top of the chair moving around, right? Makes a difference. I can turn without having to turn my body. Makes a difference. Having two screens up and having it at the correct eye level,
Hmm.
having, a desk that I don't know if you know this, but I'm on the short side.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah. So
You're
so
always sitting when I
a
see
lot of
you.
people don't notice, but I'm not even 5 foot. And so my desk, the chair in my office, I can raise it up, right? So that I'm typing in a place where my wrists are comfortable and I'm at a good angle.
Hmm.
But when I'm at home, I'm at the dining room table and I look like a small child sitting at the table getting ready to eat lunch. And so sometimes I have to put a pillow under me or something to get up.
Yeah, and
And,
we don't have phone books anymore,
and there are no phone
so I
books.
don't know what you
And it
do.
just looks weird if I'm sitting in a booster seat. So I try to avoid that. In any event, you don't know what the setup is for your employees in their offices. And so you have less control. You even have less control over mess. You don't know how messy someone is or whether or not, they might be dressed very nicely on the top. But what if they're wearing, those pajama pants that hang off the bottom and they trip over something like that?
We had a workers' comp claim for somebody tripping over a laundry basket in their hallway
Yes. Yes.
during the workday, working from home.
Right.
Um, that's real exposure now that we didn't have, you know.
Right. So, if they got up to go to the bathroom, for instance, and they're walking through the hallway and they trip over that, as they did here, the laundry basket,
Hmm.
they're allowed to get up and go to the bathroom just like they are here. We just have control over whether or not we have laundry baskets in our hallways, which generally we don't at the office, but you don't know what that's like at home. So, part of our rules with working from home is to make sure that there is a set aside space, that it is as ergonomically set up as possible. We check in with our employees to make sure that they are um, checking themselves. How does your back feel? How do your wrists feel? Your hands feel? Do you have any strain on your eyes? What do you need? We take a lot of care in making sure that they're set up in a way that makes sense for them. But at the end of the day, we really can't control how or what they have in their home, how
Well,
things are set up.
and I think the big takeaway here is there's a lot of business owners that I don't think know that they can set those parameters in place for their remote at home employees,
Sure.
right? You can, as the employer, go check out their at home workspace. You can impose certain regulations and things that you want them to have in their workspace and minimum requirements in order to say, sign off on them being able to work from home as long as they can meet these standards for what their workspace may look like and how you want that to be set up. At the end of it all, like you said, You have no control over whether or not they use it while they're there, but it gives you a little bit more control, a little bit more to mitigate that risk when it's all said and done. For those at home employees that I think for the past couple of years have just been sort of setting up however they want or however they can.
Right. And then you have the comings and goings. The idea that an hourly employee for sure who is leaving their home to come to the office, what happens between their home and the office and their in the office and their home at night isn't the responsibility of the employer. But because of that blur between work and life, from working from home, they may be leaving their home to go to a job site, right? And therefore, during the day, that would be part of their workday. And if they are injured between their home and that work site, it very, very well could be a workers' compensation claim. The other piece of this, beyond trying to manage how they're setting up their office and whether or not they're being it's considerate of their bodies and the way that they're set up as they would be or we would be while they're in the office. The other idea of this is if you have remote workers who are working in other states, to make sure that you have those listed on your workers' compensation policy and accurately accounted for. Like I said, there could be very different rules, limits
Mm-hmm.
that apply in another state from the state that you're in. So if you have employees who are working other places and they're working other states, we had a firm that had an employee who decided to move to Europe. And that was fine for them because the services that they were providing could be done from anywhere in the world. What a great advantage, right? But now we have an employer who has to deal with a global exposure and how to handle those kinds of
Right.
exposures. So
And it's
asking the
not
question.
just, yeah, it's, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
It's
that's
not
okay.
just, employees who are currently employees of that business deciding that they're going to move somewhere else that's more convenient for themselves or their family. We're seeing a lot of businesses now hire all over the country, all over the world. You're not just limited geographically to the talent that can reasonably make it into your office now. I think a lot of businesses have realized that, they can function with remote staff, and that kind of opened up a lot of opportunity for the businesses to hire different people in different areas.
Absolutely.
So we're seeing a
Absolutely.
huge uptick in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So no more, I think, do we have to really focus on whether or not the productivity exists for employees that are working from home. I think we have found that given the right kind of management and the right kinds of I guess litmus tests to figure out whether or not they're actually completing the work that they say they're completing. We have pretty good ways, depending upon the industry, of doing that. And so that's not really the concern anymore. The concern now is where are they? How are they working? How are we accounting for them as employers and making sure that they're safe? We're safe. We're managing and controlling the environment as much as we can within reason, and that we understand what our exposures are. So, asking the questions, making sure we understand where our employees are working
Hmm.
and what setup they have, I think will go so far for so long as we know the questions to ask and how to make sure we're managing it.
Yeah, and I think from a business owner's perspective, depending on the industry that you're in and what these employees may or may not be doing, there's, like you said, there's workers' comp exposure
Mm-hmm.
that could vary from state to state. There's disability and paid family leave exposure and concerns to think about. There's potentially auto liability issues that need to be considered depending on what they do. Um, there may be professional liability concerns, there may be general liability concerns. So it touches on all different types
Property.
of, yeah, exactly. And it touches on a lot of different policies and exposures and all dependent on the type of industry. Design firms, may have a little bit less concern in terms of professional liability exposure because it's worldwide coverage anyway. But
For the
if
most
they're
part.
for the most part, but if they're undertaking projects you said the one employee that moved to Europe, like pick up a project there, or if that's something that they have the flexibility to do. It's worldwide coverage, but there's differences in the way that those policies respond to claims. And so it may be things that an employer just thinks is okay, we'll just deal with the workers' comp aspect of this and we'll be okay. But there's a lot of other implications. And we haven't even touched on the potential cyber issues associated with remote staff.
Absolutely. And I was just going to say, we've talked a lot about cyber in the just the tips series, but it really does infiltrate every element of the things that we do. And we've seen such an incredible uptick in claims over the past couple of years during the pandemic because work from home setups generally don't have the same kinds of security, firewalls, or maintaining the kind of antivirus software that's necessary to stop things from coming in. So, like Eric mentioned before, you can control what your employees do and how they approach work and the parameters around it. So include things like requiring certain antivirus, um, and making sure that they are doing the annual trainings for phishing, that they are utilizing MFA where they can,
Mm-hmm.
and doing all the things that you would expect an employee to do to keep you safe, and making sure that they can deliver a work product that is free from viruses and minimizes your exposure as the employer and your stuff, but also minimizes the exposure that something might get attached to an email and sent out the door to a client or to a vendor or someone.
Right, and I think to remember too, as the business owner, you're under no obligation to allow your staff to work from home. If you choose to allow that, you can impose minimum requirements on their workstation, their technology, like you said, uh, for them to meet those requirements and be allowed to work from home. And if they can't meet those requirements, then they can't. Um, and so it's as simple as that. Um, but it's a changing world and it's a changing landscape, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this. Employees are, especially in this economy, kind of holding the cards a little bit and saying, you know what, there's another opportunity out here for me that the greener pastures are there for the employees, and if somebody's going to let them work from home, for a lot of people, that's very enticing. And if you're not willing to let them do that, then maybe they decide to go somewhere else. There are a lot of people that choose not to do it. But I think we're going to see it happen more and more. So, game planning for it, talking to your insurance people, talking to your attorneys, your advisors to
Your IT folks.
yep, to make sure that you're set up for it the way that you need to is just smart. Um, is a smart approach to running your business, just like anything else that you would do.
Sure.
Get out in front of it, and don't be blindsided by the issues.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much. This was a great tips.
These were great tips. I
Mm.
think this was a good session. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening on whatever this is. We still think it's a podcast,
Maybe.
maybe. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. Just the tips, Jen and Eric.